What if I told you that the moon and the stars could tell you more about you? Doesn't that sound intriguing? Well, according to Alice Bailey, the author of a book called A Treatise on the Seven Rays, there may come to you in life an awakening of the intuition which would translate modern astrology into something of real moment and significance to the world. Now, with this in mind, the defining meaning of astrology comes from the Cambridge Academic Content Dictionary, and this says that the study of astrology is the belief that the movements and positions of the sun and the moon and the planets follow a belief that they affect the character and lives of people. Now, astrology is widely debated, but it is real and it can affect your life too. Today I'm talking to you all in attempts of getting all to believe in the power of astrology. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about astrology and history, and then I'm going to discuss some falsehoods and misconceptions about astrology, and even discuss some positive outcomes from following astrology too. When we start looking at astrology through history, we see that there is an author named Holden, and he tells us facts in a book that he published called A History of Horoscopic Astrology. And this book tells us things about how Babylonians actually invented astrology in the 2nd millennium BC. He also tells us about how the early Egyptians actually originally mapped the sky of constellations and used them to tell time and fortune, setting up their own form of astrology themselves. We even see that there's an author named Beck in 2007, and he wrote a book called A Brief History of Ancient Astrology. And in this book, he tells us things about how astrology has been said in history to actually predict earthly outcomes as well as natal horoscopes, which is actually some of the form of astrology that we do still follow today. Roger Beck even continues to state in his book that there actually was a major work of ancient Greek astrology found dated back to CE 150, and this was called Ptolemy's Almagest. Now, after listening to just a few basic pieces of the history of astrology, you may have preconceived ideas and think that this is all false, but it is not too late to change your mind and start listening more about astrology. We see things from an author called Plate, who wrote a book in 2002. And this book was called Bad Astronomy and Misconceptions. And in this book, he tells us that apologists for astronomy try to distract critics rather than actually argue relevant points attempting to disprove astrology. He even tells us that astrology and astronomy used to actually be the same thing, and this sort of legitimizes astrology when you start to think about it. Back in history, people originally thought that astrology and astronomy were the same thing. They believed that if you followed certain stars and planets, that they would tell you more about yourself. They would teach you what certain things would happen and what they would mean. So if they thought that all of these things were the same thing back then, it sort of just recently started to break apart and become individual. Now, almost everything is based off the stars, the sun, and the moon. So why can't our lives be affected by them as well? We see things like the moon that controls the oceans and the tidal waves, and we see that the sun keeps us alive and warm and able to eat. So shouldn't these things be affecting our bodies as well? We then start to see the positive effects when we start following astrology and listening to things that it has to say. We see that there was actually a group of people, Sugarman, MP, Buxton, and Tallis, who wrote an article in 2011. And this article was just talking about astrology and the things that happens when you start following it. And in this article, it said things about how people tend to look at others' astrological signs and see if they are compatible based off of how their stars align. It also discusses things like the Barnum effect. Now, what the Barnum effect is that people tend to accept general characterizations of themselves as accurate that are based off of the positions of the sun, the moon, and the stars when you were first born. So if you take the time that you were born and the years, you will see where exactly everything was that day you were born at the exact time. You were received a star sign, a moon sign, and it's said to say that if you have similar star signs as other people, you'll be more compatible. And this is really a positive effect, because if you tend to believe this, you'll search out and just naturally find certain friends that are compatible with you based off of these star signs. We also see that people can seek astrological explanation for life events, personal life, and things like that. The star patterns are said to have an ability to know a person and their behaviors and personality based off of these time patterns in these birth charts to help guide you through life and just make decisions based off of how you are supposed to be based off of these times. I personally follow astrology every day, but this doesn't mean just silly horoscopes and things like that in newspapers. I have a birth chart that I found myself showing me the positions of the stars exactly from the day I was born. And it provides me with information that could match me as a person based off of those patterns. Now, everyone can actually find their own birth charts online. You can get on websites and you can put in just your birthday, and it will tell you what your star signs are and where all of the planets were in the sky at exact time and day that you were born. And once you receive these things, you start to see that this is what your star signs are and how you can be compatible and how you can start following astrology for yourself. Now, in conclusion to all of this, while astrology is highly debated on being real or not, it has been prevalent for thousands of years, and it has helped people across the world throughout history survive and thrive. While some signs point to astrology just being fictional, many signs point to this being something so helpful and intriguing to understand more about yourself. Thank you.